and welcome to tonight's webinar hosted by the ACT branch of the Australian Institute of International Affairs. My name's Natalie Mobini. I'm a member of the branch council and I'll be chairing our webinar this evening. We're very pleased to be joined tonight by branch members and guests from Canberra and elsewhere in Australia and internationally. We have more than 100 people registered for this session. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm honoured tonight to introduce our guest speaker. Catherine Boomer is World Vision International's Senior Advisor for External Engagement, responsible for advocacy and external engagement with World Vision stakeholders across many disciplines at global level. Catherine has been with World Vision since 2006, formerly serving as Director for External Relations based out of New York and Head of Government Relations with World Vision Australia. Catherine has had a diverse career ranging across government, politics, media and NGO sectors. Although I hazard she's never faced a year and an environment quite like this one. I'm very happy to welcome Catherine tonight and invite her to speak to us on her subject of global INGO advocacy in times of a pandemic. Following our usual format, Catherine will speak for 20 to 30 minutes, following which we will have Q&A, and you can submit questions at any stage through the Q&A function on your Zoom screen. Catherine, welcome.
Thank you very much, Natalie. It's a great pleasure to be here tonight, and I really appreciate the opportunity to join this discussion with your members. So I'll share my screen now. Okay, so I'm going to be speaking, as Natalie said, about the role of World Vision as a large international non-government organisation undertaking both a response to COVID-19, but focusing on my area of expertise, which is the external engagement sphere at the global level. But just as a bit of background, I'm sure most of you would be aware of World Vision. We do have a fairly high recognition rate here in Australia. But for those of you who may not be so familiar, I've got a couple of introductory background setters to whiz through. So we're a Christian relief development and advocacy organisation. We are child focused and we are community centred. And our mission is to overcome poverty and injustice, and we work all around the world serving communities regardless of religion, race, ethnicity or gender. A few facts and a few statistics to illustrate our scope. We work in 90 countries with almost 40,000 staff and volunteers. And last year alone, we supported 25 million children with an annual budget of over $2.5 billion. So you can see we are a very large organisation. We're in fact the largest child-focused INGO in the world. This is a little snapshot of some of the results from last year. We work across 4 sectors primarily, so health and nutrition, education, child protection and livelihoods. We also have a branch of the organisation called Vision Fund, which does microloans at community level. So it's a broad scope of work that we do, both in long-term development programs where we work on a sponsorship model where we go into communities and work with them for 15 years generally. Our humanitarian response capability, last year we did over 76 emergency responses. But nothing like the scale of what we're doing now with COVID, which we'll come to in a minute. And then we work on advocacy and external engagement, because if you're just addressing the problem, it's putting a band-aid on it, it's not addressing the root cause. So we work to advocate, advocate and influence with governments, donors and other stakeholders to address the underlying causes of poverty and injustice. So this is what we were doing last year. Then along came COVID. And the world changed for all of us. So World Vision has been operating for 70 years, and we are fully geared to doing very rapid onset responses to emergencies at all times. So we immediately activated our response processes, and with an aim of reaching 72 million people through a $350 million response. It initially started focused on 17 countries, then moved to 30, and then very quickly moved to the whole of our organisation. So this response is being implemented right across those 90 countries in which we work. And our work, as always, is focused on children and on the most vulnerable. And I just thought this was a nice little fact I saw today as I was in another presentation. Every 60 seconds, apparently, we're helping 200 people in some respect in relation to this pandemic response. So our response has 4 objectives. The first one is a health prevention objective, which involves things like water and sanitation, distribution of soap and personal protective equipment and so on. It's a very direct, immediate health response. The second area is strengthening health systems and workers. And this is an area that we engage in all the time, not just in responses. We know that we won't address the health challenges in the places and communities in which we work unless the systems are strengthened, if they've got the hospitals, the medication, the staff, the budgets, in order to deliver health to communities. So we're continuing that work with a particular emphasis on ensuring that those systems can cope with what's happening with COVID. We are already seeing that COVID is impacting well beyond health on children. Children are out of school and there are massive education, secondary impacts. Food security is a big challenge. We've had the World Food Programme estimating massive malnutrition and hunger resulting from the loss of livelihoods and the economic impacts of this pandemic. We're seeing also peaks in violence against children in homes and other child protection issues coming to the fore. So we're looking to address those through that objective. And the fourth is the one in which I dwell, which is collaborating and advocating to ensure that the vulnerable children are protected. So this is the results of our response so far. We've reached over 36 million people. And had huge, and these numbers that are clocking up every day extraordinarily. The reach and impact of this work, I think, is impressive and important. Particularly, World Vision has a unique capacity in this context in that we are both a global organisation with global reach, but we are embedded in communities. We work right on the front line with a large number of feet on the ground at the front lines of where action is needed. So our response covers a whole range of areas that you can see there. So zooming now into the advocacy and external engagement piece, which is around our objective 4, collaborate and advocate to ensure vulnerable children are protected. The writ large, the objective is about ensuring that the world's response prioritises and protects children from the impacts of this pandemic, both the direct health impacts and then those secondary impacts that I briefly mentioned before. So that involves engaging and influencing in a whole range of areas, from global to local level, so at global level, regional level, in developed countries and in our field office countries, right down to the community level. But I'm going to focus primarily on global engagement this evening. So what is it that we're doing when we say external engagement? What are we talking about? In humanitarian responses, one of the first things that is set up is the cluster coordination system, which is run by the UN, but brings all of the players who are delivering response elements in different capacities together to coordinate, so that we're not all trying to do the same thing in the same place. We spread the capacities and address the needs together in a coordinated manner. So we are right in the centre of a wide range of cluster processes. Influencing policy, classic advocacy, trying to influence policies, legislation and so on, of course. we're doing a lot of technical response inputs through the clusters and through other working groups that we're on with global stakeholders. So providing recommendations on methodologies for response implementation across all of those areas that we're involved in. Intelligence gathering in order to know what we need to be doing next. We need to understand where our stakeholders, the multilateral system is trending, and we share that information across our organisation to help focus and refine our responses. Engagement is also for us about pre-positioning for resource acquisition, which is particularly important in a humanitarian response. And that's a very interesting area that's happening at the moment, though the flows are not coming to the NGOs at the moment. The UN is clinging tightly to the funding chains at the moment, but we're working on that. In all of our advocacy, response and otherwise, we aim to amplify children's voices. We believe that children can and should be empowered to advocate and speak for themselves and to hear their perspectives and views heard in decision-making forums and around the tables where people are making decisions that will impact their lives. So we have a very strong child focus, both in the evidence that we bring, but also in actually bringing real children to real tables for some of those engagements. And through all of this, we aim to demonstrate World Vision's impact, which contributes to all of the other aspects of what we do. People are more likely to listen to our policy recommendations if they think we know what we're talking about, if we've got evidence. Donors are more likely to give us money if they think that we can demonstrate the impact and value of what we do in our programming and so on. So evidence and impact is an important component. So there are so many things that we could be doing in this response, but we aim to focus and prioritise all the time. So we have a list of priority external stakeholders who are the ones that we believe we most need to work with to achieve our objectives and to contribute to the global response overall. And we have long-standing relationships with all of these organisations. This is not something we just started 100 days ago, but it intensifies and is particularly strong through the UN's humanitarian mechanisms, where there is an enormous amount of work going on at the moment. We also aim to speak with one voice, and as I said, we need authoritative evidence and recommendations and information to bring to the tables when we go in for these engagements. So we've released two reports in what is now a series called Aftershocks, which is looking at what we can anticipate coming down the pipeline from this pandemic beyond the immediate health impacts. The first one looked at impact on children's issues on violence against children, and what's happening in lockdown and so on, and then the longer term impacts on health from the pandemic. A third report is coming out soon on livelihoods, looking particularly at the impact on which contributes to malnutrition, as I said before, the impact on livelihoods and economic fallout from what's happening. And then we've got more niche specialist technical briefings on areas of particular concern. So COVID in urban contexts, health and nutrition, disruptions to education, and social protection for children. So we have a powerhouse of policy thinkers who are working to gather the evidence and develop this material so that we can speak with authority and engage in real dialogue with the stakeholders that we're talking to. So normally, advocacy and external engagement can look a bit like this. So this is our former international president speaking at the UN in New York. It's an oldie but a goodie, but I chose it for this audience because if you look closely, you might see Kevin Rudd sitting next to him. So this was a few years ago, but we do a lot of engagement in the formal UN processes like the UN General Assembly, the World Health Organization's World Health Assembly, and many others. So we put on suits and we go into the power zones and engage there. We do a lot of engagement though at community level, which is often awareness raising. This is in Malawi, and it's a drama that was put on by the local community to explain violence against children. So there's a mother and a father, and the father beats the child, and they tell the story about why physical violence against children is not okay. So community level engagement. Advocacy and external engagement can also look like this. I mentioned before that we believe that children can and should be advocating for themselves. This is a group of children who spoke at the World Health Assembly a year or so ago from across the country. We have a young leaders program which comes out of our work with children at our community level, and they nominate their peers up to national level, and then those peers nominate to our youth leader program, and then we support and empower them to engage their own governments, and a lucky few are able to go all the way to New York or Geneva and speak at the highest levels. Advocacy can also look like this. We do campaigns. This was our child health campaign, and we work with ambassadors and celebrities, in this case a football team in Africa, which has popular appeal and can change hearts and minds. It can even look like this. This is me in Mali working on a program called Citizen Voice and Action, which is our community empowerment project, where we work with communities to enable them to understand their rights and the commitments that their government has made, and for them to assess them and hold their governments accountable for the commitments that they've made. I could speak for an hour just on that. But today, all of our advocacy and engagement looks like this. And it presents particular challenges trying to influence virtually. We in most instances are fortunate that we've got strong and long-standing effective relationships of trust with most of our stakeholders, but it's changed, as with everything for all of us, it's changed the way that we do our work. So what is the result of all of this activity? In the first 100 days, we have been able to, through a very comprehensive and well-designed results framework, identify that we have directly influenced over 301 policies or products. And when we talk about products, it could be statements or technical manuals or guidance that the stakeholders are issuing, which we've made contributions to. Yeah, we've achieved 301 of those changes through over 1,000 high-level engagements with our priority Tier 1 and Tier 2 stakeholders. So those meetings are not just the ones that we attend. We don't get a tick just for turning up. We are only counting those meetings where we're either chairing, presenting, or leading in some way, and making a more significant contribution than just turning up and sitting in the meeting. So what do these wins look like? We did a lot of work around engaging with the development and the revisions, ongoing revisions of the global humanitarian response with the UN. And our focus was particularly on pressing for more child-focused action, action around gender-based violence, activity in urban environments, and a number of other of our priority themes that we want to engage on. And those asks were reflected in the emerging documents. We've done awareness raising on sanitation. If we look at a country level example, where we reached 400 million people in Rwanda with local media raising awareness on sanitation. I mentioned earlier, we are leading in 13 global cluster coordination processes on everything from nutrition and child protection to food security. And these are really important engagement areas in the context of a humanitarian response. If you are looking at a government engagement example, we worked with the government of the Philippines to establish a health and child protection referral pathway for COVID-19, a specific health system process with the government to ensure child health. And in many contexts, we've signed memoranda of understanding with governments to resolve humanitarian access issues. So with lockdown, there's particular challenges in reaching those who really need our help. So we're negotiating that humanitarian space and reaching agreement in governments to enable us to continue our work. And also, if we look at perhaps an engagement with a multilateral organisation, we've been working with the World Food Programme to resolve logistics and supply chain issues in many countries around the world. So that's a quick snapshot. I'm just checking my time. That's my 20 minutes. So I'm more than happy to engage on any aspect of anything that I've covered tonight. I'm interested to hear your questions and to explore what it is that you're interested in. And just to say thank you once again for the opportunity to be with you this evening.
Thank you so much, Catherine, and for your presentation, and also you know, for the wonderful work that you're doing as part of your team. So we do have some questions that are starting to come in. I'm actually going to take the chair's prerogative to ask the first question, if I might, which is that we seem to be seeing sort of two seemingly contradictory tendencies in the response to COVID-19 globally. I mean, one instinct has been to close off to the outside world, even to other states in our own country, and focus on self-protection and self-sufficiency. The other would be to recognise that we are all deeply interconnected, that our interests are inextricably linked, and that suffering in one part of the world affects us all. Now, I would guess that World Vision's sort of work sort of very much depends on the second view prevailing. And I'm just wondering, as you're seeing it sort of at the global level, do you think that that message is getting through to enough of our leaders?
Right. Yeah, nationalism versus multilateralism or globalism. It's a fascinating topic and one which we're doing a lot of deep thinking about. As I said, we do work at all levels, and in normal circumstances, the engagement at global level can be fairly niche. I mean, it can take months to negotiate to insert a comma in a UN document. Does that really impact children on the ground in a developing country? Potentially down the track, but we've for some time realised that the most significant change is going to happen at the national level, which is why we have this local level advocacy accountability process that I was talking about before. So whether we trend towards nationalism or trend towards the globalism as a result of this this pandemic, we will be continuing to engage in both areas. Obviously, the trend for nationalism, isolation and narrowing of connections to global mechanisms is a concern, because the global commitments are accountability measures to which governments can be held accountable. We can use those at national level to empower communities to press their governments for action. So the narrowing of global space would be a deep concern. But I think, as the UN Secretary General has said, and the Executive Director of the World Health Organization, this pandemic is not going to be over until it's over everywhere. And we cannot defeat it and resolve it and address the impacts of it just in a few rich or poor isolated countries, wherever they may be. The borders are porous. This virus does not respect borders, and we have to have coordinated mechanisms which are going to be needed to enable us to address the challenge. Can you just refresh me on the second part of the question? I didn't have my pen ready.
Oh, no, I think that you've covered it. It was really about that tension and whether there is at the national and global levels, that message around precisely what you just said, that this won't be over anywhere until it's over everywhere, is penetrating sufficiently.
Yes, well, certainly in international NGO circles and so on, your members probably know a lot more about what that looks like in the Australian context than I do.
Okay, so I'm going to move now to one of the questions that's come in. This is from Peter McCauley, one of our branch members, also from the ANU. Hi, Peter. Now, Peter says, Catherine, you mentioned the importance of advocacy in World Vision's work. One of the notable features of the COVID-19 crisis so far, the lack of significant responses to the crisis from most Western donor nations. This is probably not unrelated to the conversation we were just having, I guess. What is World Vision's view about the international response from OECD donors so far? And do you see any prospects for a stronger response from Western donor countries?
Sadly, no. I think we have got quite a big engine room which is looking at all of this. We're doing quite well with our individual appeal for funding, but most of our funding comes from individuals and from sponsors. We have a relatively small grant portfolio of about 20% of our overall funding, which comes through those pipelines. So that's becoming more important. The UN is only at about 40%, I think, of the funding that it has called for the response to this pandemic, and the numbers aren't going up rapidly. This is where we see that nationalism effect. If governments have got money, they're spending it on rescue packages and safety nets in their own countries, as we've seen here in Australia. And of course, those massive expenditures at national level to protect, national populations, perfectly understandable, but it is likely, almost inevitable, that this is going to cut aid budgets further down the track. The whole of the INGO industry is bracing for this, and the UN system as well, for that matter. I mean, if you just take the example of what's happened with the US withdrawing funds from the World Food Programme, I mean, it's going to have extraordinary and quite significantly bad impacts on the ability of the World Health Organization to deliver its mandate. So if we trend towards the globalization one, and more governments realise that no one wins unless everyone wins, and we need a global solution, that might loosen the purse strings. The worst case scenario is that knuckling down to protecting our own backyard first and not worrying about others. In Australia, obviously, we're an island. We've got a little bit of an advantage there, but in country, in Latin America, in Africa, in Europe, obviously, as we've already seen, those nationalist approaches are not going to cut it, and we're hopeful that there will still be an eye on the ball of the need for those global joined up approaches, and then of course the money to fund them.
A question that's come in also from one of our council members, Phil Dyack, is really about cooperation between NGOs, and I was wondering about this as well. His question is, does World Vision coordinate or complement its activities with other organisations, such as Save the Children? And mine was really about, in times like this, a crisis like this, how well broadly two different INGOs work together. Is there much sharing of strategy, resources, learning, or do the sort of funding mechanisms force organisations to compete rather than collaborate?
No, well, partnering has been an important feature of our work for many years, and I've spoken here mostly about the large multilateral stakeholders that we have in the context of this response, but our broader external engagement strategy, excuse me, includes stakeholders across networks and coalitions, NGOs, faith groups, academia and others. And the partner NGOs is a particularly important group. Just as one example, we are a member of a group called Joining Forces, which is the united work of the child-focused agencies. So that's UNICEF, Save the Children, World Vision, CARE International and SOS Children's Villages. So they're the 5 big child-focused INGOs, and we have an ongoing partnership. Our president and the presidents and CEOs of the other organisations meet quarterly to work on agendas to align and coordinate our work in support of children. So there's absolutely a serious intent always to work with partners wherever possible, and that's at all levels, at global level. And in fact, in this pandemic, we've seen our work with Joining Forces pay dividends at the national level, where Joining Forces coalitions are having a lot of success in engaging governments at the national level.
Terrific. Okay, one of the first questions that came from Tazia Huck, who asks how the organisation ensures the safety of field workers, especially working in regions with the least COVID-19 informed people.
Yeah, this has been extremely challenging, and it's not an area I know a huge amount of work about, information about. But one of the first principles of our organisation is that we value our people, and their safety and security always comes first. So there is a website with about 1 billion resources on staying safe in the field in all normal circumstances, and an even larger trove of that information, guidance and process around supporting our staff in this instance. A lot of our staff are in countries where there are lockdowns are still working from home. We're minimising and the governments are restricting the numbers that can go in to do that direct humanitarian delivery sort of work. So the delivery of soap or water or personal protective equipment or equipment for hospitals and so on is very tightly managed and controlled. So when I was talking about that engagement around negotiating humanitarian space, it's about negotiating how we do that safely. For our staff and for the communities that we're visiting. I know there's particular concerns and challenges with that in relation to large refugee camps in South Sudan or the Rohingyas. If you bring in, if a well-intentioned humanitarian brings in COVID into one of those camps, the results could be absolutely catastrophic. So there are enormous safety precautions in place.
A question from Hannah Jareth, also a member of our branch here in Canberra. Thank you again for your presentation. World Vision's empowerment and accountability program seems likely to work more effectively in non-authoritarian regimes than in authoritarian regimes. How does World Vision explain the risks of seeking accountability from governments and corporations to young program participants?
Okay, this might be a little bit of a longer answer, so I'll explain some of the principles of our program. Excuse me, which is called Citizen Voice and Action. So it's not confrontational. It is about making citizens aware of what their government has committed to, and then opening a dialogue between them and their in first instance, their local authorities. So for example, if the government has said that they will have 1 teacher for every 30 students in across their country, that's their sort of health policy, education policy commitment, the community can then go, hang on, let's have a look at how many teachers we have in our community. We've only got 1 teacher for every 60 students. And then that enables the community representatives to go to the local education department and say, look, here's what you've committed to, here's our reality, can we work out a solution? And the solution isn't always the government's solution. It can be with contributions from many places, including the community itself. So it might turn out that the reason that there aren't enough teachers in this particular community is that there's no community housing for the teachers. So the community might pitch in and help to build a house for the teacher. The government will find the salary for the new teacher, and you know, everybody wins. So it's not about empowering people with their rights so that they can go and bang on the table and complain and demand action, because that doesn't achieve anything at any level. It's about a solution focus and an accountability focus. That said, that is more challenging in context with an authoritarian regime. We tread very lightly with this program, for instance, in China. But we have found it to work even in some very restricted contexts. There is common ground to be found. You don't necessarily go after the controversial issues on which you know an authoritarian government has particular set views that will simply not change. You look for the sweet spot where there's community need and an ability for the government to shift and work to try to navigate a way through that. Our children are involved in the citizen voice and action process, primarily in the formation end, where we ask the communities, what is it that they want and need? We get them to define their own needs. What is it that they really want? Do they want to address education? Do they want to look at health? Do they want to, which areas do they want to engage in? And then we gather all of the stakeholders, so the elders and leaders, faith leaders, teachers, health workers, the local government authorities, and the children. And everybody has their say in that process. So children participate in expressing their views about what they want to see happening in their communities. And once there is a decision on an agenda, then children can participate in various activities. In some cases, I've seen some great examples where children have been part of the delegations that have gone to meet the local authorities or even their national governments to present their views on particular issues. So again, we have extraordinarily detailed child protection policies that govern the way that we work with children. And the very first principle of that is protecting them from any harm whatsoever, and we take that very, very seriously. And there's a lot of work in preparing and working with those children before any of that kind of activity happens.
Can you give us an idea of the geographic spread of the countries that World Vision is working in? And have there been any places during this period where it's just been deemed too dangerous and it's been necessary to withdraw or shut down programs?
So as I said, we work in 90 countries. So 20 of those are the developed countries, where what we call our support offices, which are the money-making offices, like Australia and the US and Japan and Germany and the UK. So we're in 70 developing or transitional economy countries across all continents. So we're in almost, we've got, I think, 14 countries in Latin America, a shrinking program in the Middle East and Eastern Europe. We used to have a lot of work in Eastern European countries, but those have transitioned out, and we have withdrawn from a couple of those countries. We're in 21 countries in Africa and 14 across Asia. So we haven't withdrawn from any countries apart from those Middle Eastern countries. Georgia, I think, is the most recent one that we've closed down, but we've opened up, for instance, in Central African Republic. Part of our global strategy is that focus on vulnerability. We want to be where the world's most vulnerable children are, and often it is in those countries which are fragile contexts or which have broken governments and really need a lot of support. So we've opened up there. We opened up we're doing expanded work in South Sudan and around the Rohingya situation in Bangladesh. a number of those areas are expanding, so it ebbs and flows. We put our eggs where the vulnerability basket is biggest.
Okay, now it wouldn't be an ACT branch event if we didn't have a question these days about what is China's role in all this. And the question that we have received from John Tillerman, one of our branch members, is, can you speak to China's interactions with INGOs in relation to COVID-19? And I also had a broader question, really, which is about how the entry of non-traditional donor nations in recent years, what impact that's had on your work. Now, I've lost vision on Catherine. I'm hoping that she can still hear us.
Yes, I can. I'm sorry. I've just got a message saying that it's failed to start. Something's happened with the video. It froze and then it shut down. My apologies. But I can still hear. China in relation to INGOs and COVID. That's not something I have specific information on myself. My focus is on this global engagement, though we do have another team that is working on engagement at national level and coordinating that work. I haven't seen anything specific on China, but as I said, we have a good operating environment with China, but with a restricted program. There are aspects of our work that just don't work there. And we're sensitive to that. But we can still engage with the government there. There's a particular opening for this children's voices piece. The Chinese government doesn't like it when INGOs walk in and demand changes to XYZ policy. But if a delegation of children come in and present their pictures of their vision for the future of China, it's all nice. So there are ways and ways of engaging there. But I have no insight into how that's going, I'm afraid, with the particular context with COVID.
No worries, thank you. And there's another question here, which I guess is also around broader engagement. And I think it's harking back to your reference at the very beginning, of course, to the fact that World Vision is an organisation with a Christian ethos and inspiration. So the question from Kay is, do you have Muslim donors or sponsors?
Yes, we do. And we work, we have a very large program of work under what we call faith and development. And this is a really growing area of interest for a lot of donors, including the World Bank, where we're part of a dialogue on faith and development with them. The World Bank is recognising that faith leaders can play a powerful role at the community level. And we work with faith leaders in every context in which we work, whether they're imams or pastors or any other faith leaders in the communities in which we engage, because they are voices of authority and influence in their communities, and they can influence behaviour and change. So one of the statistics, I'm not sure if anyone caught it as we flew past the results from the COVID response, but we've worked with 76,000 faith leaders already as part of this COVID response. So we have been training the faith leaders on hand washing and prevention techniques, and then they go out and preach the word with their communities. And there's huge outreach and potential from engagement with faith leaders. And we've had a particular success with a lot of our interfaith work. As I said, we work with Muslim leaders if we're in a Muslim context, we work with Muslim leaders. And this whole area is very gaining more traction and appeal with donors because there's evidence that it works. This approach is an area of success. The Australian government's recognised this, particularly with World Vision and other Christian organisations working in the Pacific, where Christian faith is a particularly strong driver within those cultures, and working with and through church leaders in those countries delivers significant benefits.
Catherine, can you speak on any other ways in which the Christian ethos of the organisation makes a difference in terms of how it goes about its development work?
Yes, I think for me the fundamental thing about what we call our Christian identity is that it is the inspiration for virtually all of our staff. We don't have jobs, we have callings. A lot of people feel impelled to do this work in service as part of an expression of their Christian faith. So you get extra dedicated, extra passionate, extra committed people who are doing what they're doing because of their faith and the deep compulsion to respond to what they see as a call from God to do this work. So it creates a different kind of culture amongst a human resource, from a human resources perspective. It creates a very different culture and raison d'etre for the organisation. So if you look at the private sector is motivated by profit, and government is motivated by power. NGOs are motivated by goodwill. Then you add, for World Vision, you add the motivation of faith, which adds another dimension to our work. And I think it's that aspect I already mentioned about working with and through faith partners and communities and leaders is something that obviously we're good at, because we bring that. We found, working in Pakistan, this is just a small example, it was a while ago, but maybe about 6 or 7 years ago, there was a very bad situation where there was an armed attack on a compound of humanitarian aid workers in Pakistan after the very bad earthquakes there a number of years ago. And I think about 30 aid workers were killed. The World Vision staff were spared because they were people of the book. And so there are elements of faith that impinge and enter upon a lot of what we do.
Okay, now we're making some efforts behind the scenes to see whether we can get Catherine's vision back, but in the meantime, we'll continue the conversation. Now, I know, Catherine, from your CV that you've undertaken extended placements with World Vision field officers in Malawi and Mali. And we've had a question from Amanda Lynch from our branch, which is about how that experience has influenced your perspective on aid, I guess the way that you undertake your advocacy work.
That was probably personally the most challenging and inspiring thing I've ever done in my working career, the 3 months I spent in Malawi. First and foremost, it was a reality check. We see images of poverty on the television. We see, occasional images of starving children or refugee camps or whatever. But it's very, very different when you're there in person and seeing the reality of what that means, and listening to a mother say that, tell a story that of having to choose which one of her children to save because she could only afford medicine for one of them. And when you hear those sort of stories in person, the impact of the work becomes more important, because that child could have been saved by a 50-cent medicine. But that was beyond the reach of that woman. So seeing the reality of the impact that humanitarian and development work has on the ground reinforced my belief in its essential nature, and it made me very, very intolerant of arguments that we should cut the aid budget and look after ourselves first, look after our own backyard and not worry about others, because the scale of need in so many places in the world's poorest places is staggering, and I think that's just not understood. Certainly I didn't understand it before I went and saw it face to face either, and I think many Australians don't really understand the reality. We say that we want to address poverty. What does poverty mean? I mean, people went berserk here because they couldn't get toilet paper for a couple of weeks. Try living in a world where there's not only no toilet paper but no toilets and no water and no electricity, and no health centre, and then you can start complaining to me about, you know, not being happy with the situation. So I think from that perspective, that was one important part of that, what I took home from there. But the other was the challenges, the realities of engaging government engagement, which is what I was doing there in those sort of countries. The time scale of getting things done is enormously slow. So it took me, I had 3 months there, and one of my missions was to engage with the health ministry at the time on maternal and child health. And on day one, I landed and started working to secure a meeting with the ministry. I actually got it 2 days before I left. So the pace of things, the way, the very slow grinding of government wheels, and challenges of corruption, and the obvious elements of corruption and diversion of funding and misappropriation of funding for government services that happens there was confronting. But it's because that happens because of poverty. You know, teachers there are paid $30 a month. And if you can't, and the same with policemen, if you can't feed your family on $30 a month and you're a policeman, what do? You take advantage of the opportunity to get a little extra however you can. So, and the complexity of those interconnected repercussions of the combined challenges in a country like that was very eye-opening.
So I'm wondering, I mean, a lot of our members obviously will have interest in Australia's own development assistance program, which will obviously need to be reshaped, and I believe is being reshaped to address the impact of COVID and its aftershocks, as you described them. I mean, what sort of changes do you think should be looked at in Australia's policy and approach towards international development moving forward from this point?
Yeah, I'd perhaps like to come back to the question from, I think it was the first question that we had about, from one of the guests about will governments cut aid in response. That's what I don't want to see happen. There has been a radical reduction in Australia's aid program over the last decade. Already, it's at the bare bones. We used to be, I think, around. It's a long. This used to be my advocacy when I was with World Vision Australia. I think we were about at one point about 7th most generous out of the OECD countries, and now we're down at like 21st and dropping fast. So the current level of our aid program is very low. So the primary thing I would like to see happen out of this is not when the government's trying to balance the books from the very generous and excellent support they gave to Australians in this crisis, that they don't forget that there are still needs out there. And when you consider some of the countries on our doorstep, Indonesia, Philippines, just to name two, where the pandemic is heading in very disturbing directions, we've got to remember that, keep on remembering that point, that it won't be over anywhere until it's over everywhere, and continuing to think about how we support other countries to contribute to the control and response to this pandemic.
So we have a question actually from Heath McMichael, our branch president, who's asking, do you find the attitude of governments in different countries is becoming more positive to the World Vision mission as a result of your advocacy? I mean, can you feel and see that sort of impact?
I think it can, and perhaps I'll come back to an example around citizen voice and action, and this the concern that it could be confrontational, where in fact it can end up being absolutely wonderful. This is a story that comes out of Kenya, where we introduced citizen voice and action at the local level. The community decided to have a look at health systems, and when they narrowed it down, what they found was that the biggest lack, the thing that was happening was maternal mortality caused by there not being midwives. There were not enough midwives, and at the community level. And when they found the figures, when the community compared the figures about the number of midwives they should have, they were really shocked. Now, we implemented this not just in one community, but in 17 different areas across Kenya. And the results were started coming in from across all of these, and they all had the same problem. The big problem everywhere was this issue about not enough midwives. So the community went to the local health centres, and they said, yes, you are entitled to have these midwives, but we just don't have the money to pay for them. We can't fix this problem for you, but look, we'll go and talk to the district. We'll take this to the district health centres and see what district government, and see what they've got to say. We got to the district government and they said, yes, you're entitled to health workers, but we haven't got the money. It's a national government problem. At the same time, we started that Child Health Now campaign that I showed a picture of, where we were calling on governments around the world to address maternal and child health. So we had formed a coalition with over 50 other organisations at the national level that started doing media and events and awareness raising activities nationally, mobilising people and engaging the government and targeting MPs. And one of the MPs, a woman, was the MP for an area in which World Vision was working, and she got very excited about this issue and became a champion. And she marched into the parliament, rounded up all the women and said, we're not passing this budget until we get money for midwives. So we had the local evidence, we had the mobilised community, we had the national campaign, we had a government with a champion inside causing action, and we had evidence and a lot of noise that was applying pressure to the other parliamentarians who weren't necessarily getting with the program. So it got to the point where they did block the budget, they blocked the health budget until additional funding was put in, and it was something like, I think, $80 million in additional funding for midwives that was put in that next year's budget. And everybody won. Everybody was happy about that. And that really, it was a success story for the government. It was a success for World Vision, but more importantly, it was a success for the community, because we tracked that then for another couple of years afterwards, and we actually saw maternal mortality rates go down. And that's the kind of impact we like to see.
Yeah, thank you. That's a brilliant story. So we're getting down to our last two questions. We're almost at time. So the first of those is from Philip Eliasson, also a member of our branch, who says, listening to the talk, it seems World Vision continues to apply its regular work through the new framework of COVID. For example, child protection, domestic violence, as mentioned. While these no doubt are factors in the COVID response, how does World Vision say it's different from other beneficiaries of government spending who are recasting their standard needs in the vocabulary of a new issue?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think a lot of organisations are doing that because, particularly those that are grant dependent, because basically the only money that's available for the response is repurposing existing money that's already on the ground for existing development projects. So a lot of donors are allowing adaptation of existing grants and from existing programs, and their transition to a COVID delivery. So a lot of organisations are continuing to do what they did, but with a new focus, because they have to do that because to meet the funding channels. And World Vision is doing some of that. Excuse me. But I think what we're emphasising in our engagement when we're talking to donors is that we bring some particular strengths. That faith and development perspective is one that is a unique strength, and we've already got good evidence of the impact that's having. It's our community footprint and the existing community relationships that we have on the ground that can enable us to create change on the ground fairly quickly. Because we're there and we've got the systems in place to transition. But the health response is one thing that is obviously immediate in this response, but the secondary impacts that we're talking about here impacts on education, impacts on livelihoods and economic development, impacts on health systems. Those were there before and they're going to continue. So, and they're going to be set back. If you look at the Sustainable Development Goals that we're aiming for at the moment, you know, the fear is of setbacks on that. So we actually do need more of what we do as we go forward, as we address these changes, as well as responding to the immediate health response. And there is a lot of innovation that's happening there. We're doing a lot of work around cash transfers, direct cash transfers to beneficiaries to help people to survive economically, and that's a big area of growth and one I think that's one to watch. Just seeing the time.
Yes. So I'm going to just squeeze in this last one, which is really because we have a lot of student members in our branch who are often interested in thinking about how they can pursue interesting careers in the international sphere. Now, I know from looking at your CV that you started out as a cadet journalist. You've worked in commercial talkback radio, you've worked with AusAid, you've worked as a policy advisor to an MP, as a media advisor to state government, in academia, in civil society. So what advice do you have for young people starting out in thinking about their careers and wanting to be able to make a difference?
Learn a language. I would say Spanish or Chinese would give you an edge. The thing I hear a lot when I speak with young people about this is that you can't get a job without the experience. You can't get the experience without, you know, without the opportunity. There are a lot of programs that will, you know, obviously as well as academic qualifications, which are always good. You know, it's getting your feet on the ground, as I did in my life, doing some real world stuff, and organisations like Rally International, Australian Volunteers Abroad can provide opportunities to get on the ground and do some real work. This is not a fun holiday. It's they're quite serious initiatives. You need to do quite a lot of thinking before you launch into those. But I would encourage getting on the ground and doing some groundwork, and then you can get in as into contract positions. But I mean, the thing is, it's getting into development. When you say development, maybe there's a billion things. I mean, I'm a communicator, policy, public policy specialist, and politics aficionado, and I've ended up in this branch of external engagement of international development. But you could be on the front line handing out food parcels. You could be a logistics professional flying stuff around the planet. You could be a technical specialist on health. There are 1,000 careers within development. So I would encourage people to think about a niche goal within a broader development spectrum, and where they have particular interest, and try to build some background in that, inside or outside the industry. I didn't move into development myself until I was in my late 30s, but the experience I had from media, communications and politics in Australia has certainly contributed to the work that I'm doing now.
Thank you. And thank you so much, Catherine Joy, for joining us tonight, for your presentation, and generally participating in a very wide-ranging discussion.